In the grand court of Virata, the mighty monarchs of men gathered to celebrate the union of Abhimanyu with their own princess. The atmosphere was electric as the nobles from various kingdoms arrived at dawn, their seats arranged in a majestic pattern adorned with garlands and filled with the sweet scent of incense. At the center of this resplendent assembly sat Virata, the king of Matsya, alongside his esteemed guest Drupada. The revered rulers of the earth, including Balarama and Krishna, along with their father Vasudeva, took their places nearby. Krishna's eyes sparkled as he scanned the room, his gaze lingering on each noble face. He was about to speak, when he noticed the somber mood settling over the assembly. The mighty heroes exchanged glances, their eyes fixed intently on Krishna. It was then that the divine prince began to wave a tapestry of words, drawing them into a world of remembrance and reflection. Dear friends, Krishna's voice rose above the murmurs. You are all aware of the events that have transpired, how Yudhishthira, the virtuous king, was deceitfully defeated by the son of Subala, and how he was forced to abandon his kingdom for 6 and 7 years. The Pandavas endured hardships in the forest, their plighted faith unwavering, and now in this 13th year they remain unrecognizable, serving others in menial capacities. Krishna's words hung in the air like a challenge, as if daring them to consider the weight of his words. It is for you to decide what will bring peace and prosperity to both Yudhishthira and Duryodhana, what will uphold righteousness and propriety, and what will meet with the approval of all. The assembly remained silent, their faces a mixture of concern and contemplation. Krishna continued, his voice filled with empathy. The sons of Dhritarashtra have shown no quarter to Yudhishthira, robbing him of his rightful kingdom. His brothers Arjuna and the others asked for nothing but what they had won through their own valor in battle. Krishna's words painted a vivid picture of the injustices perpetrated against the Pandavas. As he concluded, Krishna's elder brother Vasudeva rose from his seat, his eyes shining with admiration. May I pay tribute to my younger brother's words? He began, his voice filled with reverence. His speech has been marked by prudence and a regard for virtue, showing a pacific and impartial spirit. The assembly erupted into applause, their faces reflecting the gravity of Krishna's words. In this majestic setting, surrounded by nobles from various kingdoms, the fate of Yudhishthira and his brothers hung in the balance, awaiting the wisdom of the gathered assembly to bring peace. And the sun beat down upon the assembly grounds. As Baladeva stood before the gathered masses, his voice boomed through the air, carrying the weight of his words to every corner of the gathering. You have all listened to the speech of Gada's elder brother. He began, his eyes scanning the crowd with a sense of urgency, a speech characterized by virtue and prudence, one that would bring peace to both Yudhishthira and King Duryodhana. Baladeva spoke. His words painted a picture of the two brothers, sons of Kunti, who were willing to sacrifice half their kingdom for the sake of their adversary. The sons of Dhritarashtra should give up half of the kingdom, he declared, and rejoice with us that the quarrel can be so satisfactorily settled. The crowd hung on his every word, sensing the sincerity behind his plea, but not everyone was convinced by Baladeva's words, as he spoke of the mighty persons who would be pacified and happy if the opposite party behaved well. A figure rose from the shadows. It was Sinai's gallant son, Duryodhana's loyal, only his face twisted in indignation as he condemned Baladeva's speech with a stern rebuke. What folly is this? He spat, his voice dripping with disdain. Do you think that by giving up half of our kingdom we will be able to live in peace? We have taken possession of the throne with a strong hand, and it will not be easily given up. The crowd watched in silence as Duryodhana's son stood tall, his eyes blazing with determination. Baladeva listened calmly to Sinai's son, his expression unwavering. He knew that the path to peace would not be easy, but he believed that it was worth trying. Let us send a messenger, he suggested, one who will respectfully salute Bhishma and Drona and speak words of humility to Vichitraya's son. The crowd murmured in agreement, sensing the wisdom behind Baladeva's plans. The assembly dispersed. The weight of Baladeva's words hung in the air. Would his plea for peace be answered, or would the forces of war prevail once more? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the fate of the Kurus and Pandavas hung precariously in the balance. In a quiet corner of the assembly grounds, a messenger was chosen to carry Baladeva's words to Duryodhana. He set off on his journey, determined to bring peace to the warring factions. As he rode through the rolling hills and verdant forests, he carried with him the hope of a brighter future. The messenger arrived at the gates of Hastinapura, where Duryodhana's loyal subjects waited to greet him. he dismounted his horse and approached the palace. In the midst of a heated assembly, Satyaki stood tall, his words dripping with conviction. He gazed directly at the speaker who had dared to question the virtuous king. Yudhishthira's integrity, you speak as your heart dictates, he said, his voice firm, but not unkind your words reflect the nature of your soul. Satyaki's eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of those gathered around him. He saw men who were brave and strong, their hearts full of courage and loyalty, and then he saw others, cowards whose hearts were filled with fear and deceit. Like two branches on a tree, they grew from the same root, but one bore fruit, while the other withered away. Satyaki's gaze settled back on the speaker, his expression unwavering. I do not condemn your words, he said, but I condemn those who listen to them in silence. How can you, who have spoken so boldly against Yudhishthira, be permitted to speak at all? He paused, his voice growing more intense as Satyaki recalled the game of chess that had been played against the king. The clever players had challenged Yudhishthira, unskilled in the game, and won by trickery. Can such a victory be considered righteous? Satyaki asked, his voice ringing out across the assembly. Did they not take advantage of the king's honesty, his willingness to follow the rules? As he spoke, Satyaki's thoughts turned to Yudhishthira himself. The king had performed his duties to the utmost, freed from his promise to live in the forest, and now entitled to reclaim his ancestral throne, and yet he humbled himself, begging for what was rightfully his. How can this be? Satyaki asked aloud. Is it not impious and infamous to beg before one's enemies? The assembly fell silent, as if waiting for Satyaki's words to sink in. Then, with a fierce determination burning within him, he declared, I will fight for Yudhishthira. I will use my sharp arrows to beseech those who have usurped the throne. If they do not bow down to the wise king, then they and their followers must face the consequences. The regions of Satyaki's eyes blazed with a fierce light as he spoke of his comrades, Arjuna, Bhima, Drishtadyumna, and the twin brothers Nakula and Sahadeva. Who can withstand these warriors? He asked, his voice full of conviction. We will fight for what is rightfully ours, for the throne that belongs to Yudhishthira. I birth with a final declaration. Satyaki sealed his fate and the fate of those who opposed him, either Yudhishthira. As the sun rose over the kingdom, Drupada sat in council with his mighty armed friend Arjuna. The air was thick with concern as they discussed the impending war against the Kauravas. Drupada's eyes narrowed, his voice taking on a resolute tone as he spoke of Duryodhana's refusal to relinquish the throne. Arjuna, Drupada said, it is clear that Duryodhana will not yield to reason. His father Dhritarashtra, blinded by love for his son, will follow him in this folly, and Bhishma, Drona, Karna, and Sakuni, all will be swayed by their own weaknesses, imbecility, folly, or viciousness. Arjuna listened intently as Drupada continued. The words of Valadeva have guided me, and I believe we must follow his counsel. But when dealing with Duryodhana, we must not coddle him with gentle words. He is a man consumed by malice, and only the sternest of measures will reach him. Drupada rose from his seat, his eyes flashing with determination. We must prepare for war. Send word to our Olis, Salya, Preshek, to Jatsana, and the prince of the Kikayas. Let them gather their armies, that we may face the Kauravas together. As he spoke, messengers were dispatched to rally the forces of the eastern sea coast by Idata, Hardikya, Alokai, and the king of the Mallas. The list of kings went on. Bryanta, Senavandu, Valaka, Mujeksa, Subarsva, Silva, Parava, Karnavas, Nile, Virat, Harman, Durjaya, Dantavakra, Rukmaya, Janem Jaya, Ashada, Deuga, Purvapalai, Girijas, Deveka, and Akelea with his sons. The names of kings from the western seacoast were called out as well: Chimamurtai, Cambodia, Rikaka, Jayatsana, and the rulers of the land of the 5 rivers. And finally Drupada's voice rang out, naming those from the mountain regions: Janek, Isazarman, Manam, and Potamatseka, Trishek to Pondra, Dandadara, Phryatsan, Aparajita, Nishada, Surnamat, Bashamat, and Vahu. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Drupada's words hung in the air like a challenge. Let this be our plan. Let us send word to these kings that they may join us in our. The sun had set over the kingdom of Virata, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling city. King Virata, a just and wise ruler, stood in his grand hall surrounded by his advisors, and nobles Krishna, the revered sage and counselor, stood before him, his eyes shining with wisdom. Your Majesty, Krishna said, these worlds are worthy of the chief of the Samika tribe, and are calculated to promote the interests of Pandu's son. Yudhishthira of immeasurable strength, as we see. A politic course, this is our first duty. A man acting otherwise would be a great fool. Krishna's words were laced with diplomacy and tact, but beneath his calm exterior a sense of urgency and purpose burned. King Virata listened intently, his eyes never leaving Krishna's face. He knew that the wise sage spoke not only for himself, but also for the Pandavas who had been invited to the grand wedding celebration alongside the Kuras. But now with the marriage over, it was time to return home, and with a heavy heart Krishna continued his voice, steady and reassuring. Our relationship to both the Kuras and the Pandavas is equal, howsoever these two parties may behave with each other, both you and we have been invited here on the occasion of a marriage. The marriage having now been celebrated, let us go home well pleased. He paused, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something more, but he pressed on. Our duty is clear. We must send a message to the Kuras in the interests of the Pandavas. If Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhana makes peace on equitable terms, then the brotherly feelings between the Kuras and the Pandavas will sustain no injury. But if he refuses, then we must summon others to our aid. Krishna's words hung in the air like a challenge, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. King Virata nodded gravely, his mind made up. He knew that the fate of his kingdom and the balance of power in the land hung in the balance. With a gentle smile, he dispatched Krishna back to Dwaraka, accompanied by his followers and relatives. As they departed, King Virata turned to Yudhishthira and his brothers, who had been watching the scene unfold. Let us prepare for war. King Virata said, his voice steady and resolute. We must gather our armies and stand strong against the Kuras. And with that the preparations began in earnest. Messengers were sent to all the monarchs, and King Drupada joined forces with King Virata and the Pandavas. As the news of the gathering army spread, the land was filled with an air of excitement and foreboding. The rulers of the earth flocked to either side, their hearts heavy with. In the court of Drupada, the wise and venerable king, a solemn discussion took place. Drupada called upon his learned Brahmin priest, who was renowned for his exceptional understanding and heed. The priest was summoned to offer counsel on a matter of great import. Among all living beings, began Drupada, those with intelligence are superior, and among the intelligent men hold a special place of men. It is the twice-born who stand out, those who have undergone the sacred rites of passage and have dedicated themselves to the pursuit of knowledge. He paused, his eyes fixed intently on the priest. You, revered sir, continued Drupada, are at the pinnacle of understanding. Your age and learning are matched only by your intellect, which rivals that of the great Sukra or Vrihaspati, son of Indra. As you possess a deep knowledge of human nature, as evidenced by your comprehension of the true character of Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhana and Yudhishthira, the noble king of the Pandavas. Drupada then revealed the circumstances that had led to the downfall of Yudhishthira. It was with Dhritarashtra's full knowledge that Sakanai deceived the virtuous king, exploiting his naivety in the game of despite Vidura's warnings. Dhritarashtra chose to follow his son's counsel, and thus the Pandavas were cheated out of their rightful kingdom. Drupada turned to the priest with a serious expression. If you speak words of righteousness to Dhritarashtra, you will win over the hearts of his soldiers. Vidura, too, will use your words to turn against Bhishma, Drona, and Kripa, those who stand loyal to the Kauravas. When the officers are divided and the fighting men falter, our enemies will seize the opportunity to regain their footing. Drupada's eyes sparkled with a hint of determination. You must go to Hastinapura, the city of the Kuras, as an ambassador for the Pandavas. Timing your departure under the auspices of Pushya and Jaya, you will be able to promote the welfare of Yudhishthira's sons. The priest, moved by Drupada's words, set out on his mission with a sense of purpose. He traveled with a retinue of disciples, each one well versed in the principles of politics and diplomacy. As they made their way towards Hastinapura, the learned Brahman was filled with a sense of hope that he might bring about a change of heart among the Kauravas and restore justice to the land. The journey would be long and arduous, but Drupada's words had lit a fire within the priest. He knew that his task would not be easy, but he was resolute. In the city of Dwaraka, messengers were sent to inform the rulers of various lands about the impending war. Meanwhile, Arjuna, the son of Kunti and Pandu, had set out for Dwaraka along with his companions. As they arrived in the beautiful city of Anarta, they found Krishna asleep. Duryodhana, the prince of Hastinapur, entered the room, followed by Arjuna, The latter stood at the back of the bed bowing and joining his hands. When Krishna awoke, he first cast his eyes on Arjuna, and then inquired about their journey. After exchanging greetings, Krishna asked them about the purpose of their visit. Duryodhana addressed Krishna with a cheerful countenance, saying that it behooved him to lend his help in the impending war. He reminded Krishna that they were both friends and that he had arrived first at Dwaraka. Arjuna stood silently behind him, observing the scene. Unfold. Krishna replied that while Duryodhana was indeed the first to arrive, he had seen Arjuna before him according to the rules of propriety. The junior in years should have the first choice. Therefore, Krishna offered to send a large body of cowards known as the Narayanas, numbering 10 crores, to one of them and take his side. He would lay down his arms and go to the other. Dhananjaya, the son of Kunti, was given the right to choose first. After some deliberation, he selected Krishna, who had decided not to fight on the battlefield. Duryodhana, on the other hand, chose the entire army of Narayanas for himself. As soon as Duryodhana obtained that formidable army, he went to Kritavarman and secured his support. The latter gave him a body of troops, numbering an Achal and I. With this new force, the prince of Hastinapura marched forth with renewed confidence. After Duryodhana had departed, Krishna addressed Arjuna, inquiring why he had chosen him to fight on the battlefield. Arjuna replied that he was not questioning Krishna's ability to slay their enemies alone. Instead, he wanted Krishna as his charioteer and driver of his car, so that he could fulfill his long-held desire. Whereupon Krishna agreed to act as Arjuna's charioteer, and with a glad heart the two set out towards Yudhishthira, accompanied by the flower of the desert, Harish. The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the Bharata kingdom as Salya, king of Madra, led his massive army towards the Pandavas' encampment. His forces numbered in the thousands, and their armor shone like a rainbow's hues in the fading light. The earth trembled beneath their feet as they marched towards their destination. As news of Salya's approach reached Duryodhana, he hastened to receive his maternal uncle. With great fanfare he had constructed elaborate pavilions on beautiful sites, replete with garlands, meat, and choicest viands to entertain the visiting king. The servants of Duryodhana welcomed Salya like a god, and he was led to a resplendent house of entertainment that shone like a celestial retreat. Salya was pleased beyond measure by the reception, and asked the servants where the men who had prepared these places were. He wished to reward them personally. The servants, surprised by their king's generosity, submitted the matter to Duryodhana, who remained concealed until Salya's arrival. When he emerged, Duryodhana showed himself to his uncle and requested that Salya lead all his army. Salya, pleased with Duryodhana's request, granted him the boon without hesitation. He then bid farewell to his nephew and set off towards the Pandavas' encampment at Upaplavya. As he arrived, he was greeted by Yudhishthira, Thema, Arjuna, and their twin brothers. Salya accepted water for washing his feet and the customary gifts of honor, including a the king of Madras. Then asked about the Pandavas' well-being and expressed delight at seeing them safe and sound. He praised Yudhishthira's virtues, saying that he was a treasure house of righteousness, freed with his followers from their difficulties. Salya spoke of his meeting with Duryodhana and the promise he had made to lead all his army. Yudhishthira then requested that Salya protect Arjuna during the single combat between Karna and Arjuna. He knew that Salya was equal to Krishna on the field of battle, and believed that if he could dispirit Karna, the victory would be theirs. Salya agreed to do as his nephew asked, promising to speak words contradictory and fraught with harm to Karna. When the time came, the conversation concluded. Salya departed from the Pandavas' encampment, determined to fulfill his promise to Duryodhana and to aid Yudhishthira in their impending battle. The earth trembled once more as Salya's army marched towards their destination, their armor glinting like a rainbow's hues in the fading light of day. In the midst of a grand assembly, Yudhishthira, the illustrious king, posed an intriguing question to Salya, the renowned monarch. Tell me, O foremost of kings, he said, how it was that great and unparalleled misery befell Indra, the mighty god, along with his queen Salya. With a twinkle in his eye began to weave an ancient tale of events from bygone days. Listen, O king, he said, as I recount the story of how Indra's wife suffered alongside him. Is said that Twashrai, the lord of creatures and the most exalted of celestial beings, was engaged in a rigorous practice of austerities. His antipathy towards Indra had grown so strong that he created a sun with 3 heads, each resembling the sun, moon, and fire. This being possessed of immense energy had the ability to read the Vedas with one mouth, drink wine with another, and gaze at the cardinal points With the third Acelia spoke. The assembly was transported to a realm where gods and mortals coexisted. Indra, fearing that this three-headed being would supplant him as the supreme ruler of the universe, became anxious. He pondered ways to distract the being from his austere path and indulge in sensual pleasures. How may I make him addicted to worldly delights? He thought Indra's solution was to command the celestial nymphs to tempt the three-headed being with their captivating charms. The nymphs, adorned in voluptuous attire, set out to entice him with gestures of love. However, despite their best efforts, they found that the being remained steadfast in his austerities. Unmoved by their allurements, the nymphs returned to Indra, their faces flushed with exertion. "O great king," they said, "we have tried our utmost to tempt him, but he remains unswayed. He is like an unseen fold of the Burman gravity." Indra, undeterred, reflected upon other means of destroying his foe with a fierce determination burning within him. Indra hurled his thunderbolt at the three-headed being. The bolt struck true, and the being fell to the ground, its head still radiating an effulgent glow despite being lifeless. As Indra gazed upon the saying, he felt a creeping sense of dread. Just then a carpenter arrived on the scene bearing an axe on his shoulder. Indra, seeing an opportunity, commanded the carpenter to cut off the three-headed beings' heads. The carpenter, taken aback by Indra's request, hesitated, but he eventually agreed to do as he was told. As the carpenter struck off the heads, a flurry of birds emerged from each mouth: partridges from the one that beside the Vedas, quails from the. In the celestial realm, Indra, the mighty god, stood before his fellow deities, his voice trembling with concern. "This universe," he said, "has been consumed by Vritra's power. I, who once wielded thunderbolts, am now powerless against him. His strength is boundless, and I fear that even the gods cannot stand against him." The gods, along with a host of wise rishis, approached Vishnu, the supreme lord, seeking his guidance. "You almighty one," they said, "who have covered the three worlds with your steps, who have granted us ambrosial food and vanquished our enemies, what shall we do to defeat this monstrous Vritra?" Vishnu's response was wise and benevolent. "I will reveal a plan to you, dear gods. Go to Vritra, but approach him not as enemies, but as friends. Offer him conciliation, and perhaps he will see the wisdom in peace." The rishis and the gods set out, bearing Vishnu's words with them. As they approached Vritra, they beheld a being of immense power, his form radiating like the sun or moon. The rishis spoke to him, their voices gentle and persuasive. "Vritra, unconquerable one, your strength has brought suffering to all beings. Why not put aside your hostilities and join hands with Indra? Together you can rule the universe in harmony." Vritra listened, his heart wavering. He saw the sincerity of the rishis' words, but also the limitations of their proposal. "How can friendship exist between us?" he asked. "We are sworn enemies, bound by fate to clash." The rishis replied, "Friendship among righteous beings is a noble pursuit. It brings wealth and wisdom to those who seek it." Vritra was moved by their words, but still uncertain. He proposed a condition, that Indra or the gods not harm him with any weapon, whether dry or whetstone or wood, in day or night. The rishis agreed, and thus peace was forged between Vritra and Indra. But Indra's mind remained troubled, searching for a way to fulfill his duty as king of the gods, while respecting the terms of their agreement. One fateful evening, he spotted Vritra on the coast of the sea, and a plan took shape in his mind. He beheld a massive froth as large as a hill, its form neither dry nor wet, nor a weapon with vicious power coursing through it. Indra hurled the froth at Vritra, striking him down. As Vritra fell, the cardinal points brightened, and a pleasant breeze blew across the land. All beings rejoiced, and the gods sang hymns in praise of Indra. But soon darkness descended. In the celestial realms, a grand assembly of rishis and superior gods convened to discuss the future ruler of their kingdom. Their collective voice echoed through the heavens as they proclaimed Nahusha, a powerful and renowned leader, as the ideal candidate for the throne. The gods and saints approached him, extolling his virtues and urging him to accept the crown. Nahusha, however, humbly declined, citing his own weakness and inability to protect them from potential threats. He recommended Indra, the mighty king of the gods, as a more suitable ruler. But the assembly would not be swayed, assuring Nahusha that with their collective virtue and blessings, he would be able to overcome any challenges. Convinced by their words, Nahusha eventually accepted the crown, and the assembly crowned him king in a grand ceremony. As he ascended to the throne, Nahusha vowed to uphold the principles of virtue and protect his subjects, including the Brahmars, his Brahmana saints, and the gods. But as time passed, Nahusha's demeanor began to change. He became enamored with the luxuries of power and surrounded himself with celestial nymphs and damsels from the Nadana. grows his court was filled with music, dance, and poetry, and he indulged in every pleasure that came his way. The king's newfound obsession with sensual delights reached its peak when he spotted Sakai, the beloved queen of Indra, in his presence. Nahusha's eyes gleamed with desire as he summoned her to attend him, boasting about his status as the monarch of the gods and ruler of the world. Sakai, however, was not intimidated by Nahusha's boasts. She turned to Vryaspati, a wise Brahmana sage, for protection, recounting the words of encouragement he had once spoken to her about her chaste devotion to Indra. Vryaspati reassured Sakai that his words would come to pass, and that she need not fear Nahusha. But Nahusha's anger was kindled when he discovered that Sakai had sought refuge with Vryaspati, and he seethed with rage at the thought of Indra's queen being beyond his grasp. The once virtuous king now revealed a sinister intent, determined to assert his dominance over the celestial realms and claim Sakai as his own. In the realm of the gods a great turmoil had arisen. Nahusha, the king of gods, was consumed by rage and passion. His eyes blazed with fury as he beheld the beautiful Sakai, the queen of Indra, who stood before him. The gods, led by the saints, approached Nahusha, their voices filled with gentle persuasion. "Who is this king of gods?" they asked, "whose wrath shakes the very foundations of the universe? O Lord of gods, count your anger. Your subjects tremble at the sound of your thunderous voice. Let us not forget that you are a just and righteous being." The gods spoke to Nahusha in hushed tones, their words laced with compassion. But Nahusha would not be swayed. His heart was consumed by lust for Sakai, and he would not be deterred. He scoffed at the gods' warnings, his voice dripping with venom. "You are quick to lecture me on morality," he sneered. "But what about Indra? Did you not allow him to outrage Ahalya, the wife of a saint, while her husband was still alive? Why did you not stop him?" The gods replied, their voices filled with sorrow. "We shall bring Sakai to you, as you have commanded." But they knew that this would only lead to further chaos and destruction. As the gods departed, they sought out Vryaspati, the preceptor of the gods, and informed him of Nahusha's demands. Vryaspati listened intently, his wise eyes filled with concern. Sakai, trembling with fear, begged for his protection. "I do not wish to be the wife of Nahusha," she pleaded. "Deliver me from this great peril." Vryaspati, a sage and just man, refused to abandon Sakai in her time of need. He recalled an ancient verse spoken by Brahma himself: "He who delivers up a person asking for protection to their foes shall never succeed in anything they undertake." The gods and Gandharvas urged Vryaspati to reconsider, but he stood firm. Finally, after much deliberation, Vryaspati proposed a plan. Sakai would ask Nahusha for time to consider his proposal, hoping that this would give her an opportunity to escape his clutches. But as she approached, Nahusha, the king of gods, was resolute in his intentions. His eyes burned with passion as he beheld Sakai's beauty. The assembled gods, led by Agni, whispered words of encouragement to Sakai. "You are a chaste and true queen," they said. "Go to Nahusha, but know that this wicked being will soon fall from power, and Indra will reclaim his rightful place as king." And so, with a heavy heart, Sakai approached Nahusha, her fate hanging pricked. In a grand celestial court, Celia stood before Nahusha, the powerful king of the gods. With an air of confidence, Nahusha declared his intentions to Celia, although of sweet smiles. "I am the Indra of all the three worlds. Although of beautiful thighs and fair complexion, accept me as the lord." But Celia, chaste and virtuous, was terrified by Nahusha's words. She trembled like a plantain stalk in a gentle breeze. Her head bowed to Brahma. Celia joined her hands and addressed Nahusha with humility. "O Lord of the deities, I desire to obtain time. It is not known what hath become of Indra, or where he is. Having inquired into the truth regarding him, if, O Lord, I obtain no news of him, then I shall visit thee. This tell I thee for truth." Nahusha was pleased by Celia's words and granted her leave to investigate Indra's whereabouts. With a sense of determination, Celia stepped out of the court and made her way to the abode of Vryaspati. The gods, led by Agni, heard about Celia's visit and deliberated on how to promote Indra's interests. They decided to seek the counsel of Vishnu, the god of gods. The gods joined forces with Vishnu, who was killed in making speech. As the gods approached Vishnu and shared their concern about Indra's predicament, "Indra, the lord of all the gods, hath been overpowered by the sin of Brahma on his side," they said. "Thou, O Lord of the gods, art the firstborn, the ruler of the universe, and our refuge. Thou hadst assumed the form of Vishnu for the protection of all beings." Vishnu listened attentively to their words and prescribed a solution. "Let Indra offer sacrifice to me." Vishnu said, "Even I shall purify the holder of the thunderbolt, the chastiser of Pekah, having performed the holy horse sacrifice, will fearlessly regain his dignity as Lord of the gods. Vishnu's words were like ambrosia to their ears, and the gods, with their preceptor and the rishis, proceeded to perform a great horse sacrifice. A ritual was conducted at the spot where Indra was uneasy with fear. As the sacrifice progressed, the sin of Brahmanicide was distributed among trees, rivers, mountains, the earth, and when with each passing moment Indra's burden lifted, and he began to regain his dignity as Lord of the gods. As Indra emerged from his ordeal, he looked at Nasha with newfound fear. Before him stood a being who inspired awe in all animated creatures. Nasha's unapproachable nature was due to the boon granted by the Rish. In the realm of the gods, Salia stood before a majestic and chaste lady who was none other than the divine queen of Indra. As she beheld the goddess, her heart swelled with joy, and she paid respects to the gathering with reverence. In her voice the queen asked, "Who are you, O one with a lovely face?" The goddess of divination stepped forward, her youthful and lovely presence radiating an air of wisdom. "I am divination," she replied, "and I have come near you because you possess truthfulness in your heart. Your devotion to your Lord is evident, and the self-control you exhibit is a testament to your spiritual growth." The goddess' words were like a gentle breeze on a summer day, soothing and uplifting. The queen of Indra listened intently as divination continued. "Since you are devoted to your Lord and engaged in the practice of religious rites, I shall reveal to you the god Indra, the slayer of Vritra. Come with me quickly, that good fortune may be yours." With these words, divination set off. Then the queen followed closely behind us. They traversed the heavenly groves and crossed many mountains. The landscape unfolded like a tapestry before them. They passed beyond the majestic Himavat mountains, which towered above like giants of old, and reached their northern side. The air grew thick with the scent of blooming flowers. As they arrived at the shores of a vast sea, the queen's eyes widened in awe as she beheld a large island covered in lush vegetation, teeming with life. In the midst of this tropical paradise lay a breathtaking lake shimmering like liquid gold and adorned with 800 miles of lotuses in every color of the rainbow. Bees buzzed around these celestial blooms, collecting nectar from their delicate petals. As they approached the lake's center, Saksha caught sight of her Lord Indra in his miniature form within a large white lotus standing tall on its stalk. She also saw the goddess of divination, and herself had assumed minute forms to accompany Indra. In this tiny world, Saksha began to recount her husband's glorious deeds from ancient times. Indra, awakened by the queen's words, spoke up in his deep voice. "For what purpose have you come? How did I become known to you?" The goddess of divination interjected, sharing news of Nahasha, a powerful and haughty king who had usurped the sovereignty of the three worlds. This cruel ruler had commanded her to visit him and assigned her a specific time limit. "To Indra," she pleaded, "if you do not protect me, this wicked man will ensnare me in his power. That is why I have come to you in alarm." With these words, the queen of Indra's concern for her safety became clear. She implored Indra. In the realm of the gods, a subtle game of strategy was unfolding. Salia, the devoted consort of Indra, the king of the gods, approached Nahasha, a powerful deity who had been strengthened by the merits of offerings to the gods and Pitra's ancestors. Saksha, with her lotus-eyed beauty, sought out Nahasha's counsel, carrying a secret message from her husband. As she arrived at Nahasha's presence, he welcomed her warmly, his eyes sparkling with delight. "I welcome you, O lady of lovely thighs," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "What is your pleasure, O those sweet smiles? Accept me, O lady of propitious looks, who am devoted to thee." Saksha's request was not for personal gain, but rather a clever ploy to undermine Nahasha's power. She proposed that Indra be born on a novel vehicle, unlike any other god or azure. "I want you to have, O king of the gods, a palanquin carried by a number of highly dignified rishis," she said, her words dripping with cleverness. Nahasha was taken aback by this suggestion, but pleased that Saksha's request was not for personal gain. He agreed to employ the 7 rishis and the regenerate rishis to carry him on his heavenly chariot. Meanwhile, dismissed by Nahasha, Saksha hastened to Vryaspati, the illustrious preceptor of the gods, seeking his aid in finding Indra. But as she arrived at his presence, she found that little time remained for her assigned term. With Nahasha, Vryaspati, wise and powerful, reassured Saksha that he would find a way to bring about Nahasha's downfall. And look at Indra. He kindled a fire in the prescribed form and offered the best of offerings to the flames, seeking guidance from Agni, the god of fire. As the fire burned brightly, it assumed a wonderful feminine form and vanished into thin air. Agni, with his mind racing like the wind, searched far and wide, across mountains, forests, earth, and sky, but could not find Indra anywhere. He returned to Vryaspati within the twinkling of an eye, seeking guidance on what to do next. The preceptor instructed Agni to enter the waters, where the king of the gods might be hiding. Agni hesitated, knowing that in the waters lay extinction for him as a fire god, but with Vryaspati's encouragement he steeled himself and plunged into the depths, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Agni vanished into the unknown, the stage was set for an epic battle between Nahusha and Indra, with Sakshi and Vryaspati playing crucial roles in the unfolding drama of the gods. In the realm of the gods, Vryaspati stood before Agni, the mighty fire god, and proclaimed his reverence. "You are the mouth of all the gods," he said, "the carrier of sacred offerings, a witness to the inner souls of all creatures." The poets called him single and threefold, a paradox that reflected his multifaceted nature. Vryaspati's words dripped with devotion as he acknowledged Agni's power. "Abandoned by you, the universe would cease to be." Agni, pleased with Vryaspati's praise, spoke in turn, affirming his own importance. "I am the bearer of sacred offerings," he declared in a supreme sacrificial ceremony. "It is I that they worship with incessant gifts and offerings." His words echoed through the cosmos, resonating with the very fabric of existence. As Agni continued to speak, Vryaspati's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. He revealed a secret. Indra, the king of the gods, had taken refuge in the fibers of a lotus stalk, assuming a minute form. Vryaspati lent an entourage of gods, saints, and Gandharvas to where Indra lay hidden. They glorified him with tales of his former deeds, reminding him of his conquests. The slaying of Valas, Samvara, and Nimachindra's strength began to return. As he listened to their praise, his voice grew louder, and he rose from his hiding place. "I am Indra, the great lord," he declared, "the performer of 100 sacrifices." The gods and saints surrounded him, urging him to reclaim his rightful place as ruler of the universe. But Vryaspati spoke again, this time with concern etched on his face. "The human Nahusha, a king, has obtained the throne of heaven by virtue of the power of the divine saints," he said. Indra's curiosity was piqued, and he asked how Nahusha had achieved such a feat. Vryaspati explained that the gods, frightened by Indra's absence from his duties, had sought out Nahusha as their new king. They had imbued him with their power and virtue, making him a being of terrible strength. Nahusha now terrorized the universe, his very gaze poisonous to all who crossed his path. Indra vowed to overthrow Nahusha, but first he needed Allies. He turned to the guardians of the worlds, Kuvra, Ima, Sama, and Varuna, and asked for their assistance. They agreed, provided that they would be entitled to shares in sacrificial offerings. If Indra succeeded in his quest, Agni also pledged his support, promising a share in great sacrifices for himself as well. Indra, pleased with the assembly of Allies, assigned Kuvra sovereignty in the realm of the gods. Indra, the mighty chief of the deities, was convening with the guardians of the world and other divine beings to deliberate on the fate of Nahusha, a powerful being who had been causing chaos in the heavens. As they pondered their next move, a venerable ascetic named Agastya appeared at the gathering. Agastya, known for his wisdom and spiritual power, was greeted with great reverence by Indra. As Agastya approached, he was filled with joy and admiration for the gods' prosperity after Nahusha's downfall. "How fortunate that you are flourishing after the destruction of that being of universal form, as also that Vritrat," Agastya said to Indra, his eyes shining with devotion. "And how fortunate, O pure Indra! Nahusha hath been hurled from the throne of heaven." Indra's face lit up with pleasure at seeing the great saint, and he invited Agastya to sit on a seat, offering him water for washing his feet and face, as well as sacred milk. And of course Agastya settled in Salya. Another divine being present at the gathering began to question the great saint. "O revered saint, O best of Brahmanas," Salya said, "I wish to have it recited by thee how Nahusha, a vicious soul, was hurled from heaven." Agastya nodded graciously and began to recount the tale of wicked and vicious Nahusha. Agastya started, his voice dripping with emotion. He had been intoxicated with pride of strength, but we, the pure-spirited Brahmanas and celestial saints, carried him weary with toil while he was still conscious. As they journeyed on, they questioned Nahusha about certain hymns in the Vedas, which he claimed were not authentic, but Agastya revealed that these hymns had been recited by great Brahmarsis for generations, and that Nahusha's words were laced with untruth and incensed by his own ignorance. Nahusha touched Agastya on the head with his foot. But this act of disrespect only hastened his downfall as Agastya spoke to him, since thou hast pronounced as spurious the unexceptionable hymns of the Veda, and since thou ignorant wretch hast turned these unapproachable saints into animals, for carrying thee Nahusha's power and good looks. Began to Pheidias, he became agitated, and overpowered with fear Agastya pronounced the final judgment for 10,000 years. Thou shalt roam over the earth in the form of an enormous snake. When that period is full, thou mayst come back to heaven. And so Nahusha was hurled from his throne, a being transformed into a serpent condemned to wander the earth. In the realm of the gods, a magnificent procession was underway. Indra, the king of the deities, rode majestically on Airavata, the majestic elephant adorned with auspicious marks. Accompanying him were the illustrious Daivryaspatayam of Varuna and Kuvra, each radiating their divine presence. As they made their way to the three worlds, the celestial nymphs and Gandharvas sang hymns in praise of Indra's glory. The assembly was filled with an air of grandeur as the performer of 100 sacrifices. Indra, united with his queen with exceeding joy, he began to protect the worlds. His spirit, soaring like a mighty eagle, it was then that the divine Saint Angiras arrived, bearing the hymns of the Atharva Veda. He worshipped Indra, who, pleased by the offering granted a boon Atharvangiras would be known as a Rishi in the Atharva Veda and receive a share in sacrifices. As Indra honored all the deities and saints present, his satisfaction was palpable with a heart full of virtue. He governed the people with wisdom and compassion. Yet even Indra had to endure hardships, forced into concealment as he prepared to slay his foes. His wife suffered alongside him, but eventually they emerged victorious. The story of Indra's triumph served as a reminder that even the mighty can face adversity. Salya, king of the Madras, recalled this tale when speaking with Yudhishthira, the son of Kanta. He reminded Yudhishthira that just as Indra overcame his enemies, he too would reclaim his kingdom and vanquish his foes. The vicious Nahusha, once a powerful foe, had been reduced to nothing by Agastya's curse. Similarly, Yudhishthira's enemies, Karna, Duryodhana, and others, would soon meet their downfall. Salya continued, you will enjoy the entire earth from the sea to its farthest reaches with your brothers. And Draupadi's words were a testament to the power of faith and devotion. As he departed, Yudhishthira's heart swelled with hope and determination. The story of Indra's victory was meant for kings seeking triumph in battle, and Vaisapayana reminded Yudhishthira that listening to this tale would cleanse his soul, grant him bliss, and ensure his success. Yudhishthira, moved by Salya's words, turned to the king of the Madras and asked him to act as Karna's charioteer. He instructed Salya to dampen Karna's spirits by recounting Arjuna's praises. Salya agreed, his loyalty unwavering, and bid farewell to the. As the sun rose over the vast expanse of Hastinapura, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Vaisapayana, a wise and venerable sage, stood before Yudhishthira, the eldest Pandava brother, and spoke words that would change the course of history. Great hero of the Satwa race, Vaisapayana, began. Duryodhana has arrived with an army of unprecedented might. His soldiers, bearing a multitude of weapons, are like a stormy cloud about to unleash its fury upon the world. As Yudhishthira gazed out at the gathering forces, he beheld an array of warriors from far and wide, each one more formidable than the last. Prashetu, the powerful chief of the cheetahs, led his troops with an ekshot worth of soldiers, their armor glinting like 1,000 stars in the morning light. The king of Magadha, Jatsana, rode forth with his own ekshot, their faces set towards battle like unyielding mountains. Pandya, the ruler from the coastal lands, brought his troops, each one bearing an array of colorful garlands and banners that fluttered in the breezes. These mighty forces converged upon Hastinapura. The city itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. The army of Drupada, led by his valiant sons, joined the fray, their presence like a tempest that shook the very foundations of the earth. Bhairata, the king of the Matsyas, and Vagadatta, the mighty warrior from the hilly regions, rode forth to join the Pandavas, each one bringing with them an ekshot worth of soldiers. The air was filled with the clash of steel on steel, the thunder of hoofs on the ground, as these Titans prepared for battle. Meanwhile, in the city of Hastinapura, Duryodhana, the Kaurava prince, stood amidst his own army, a sea of faces that seemed to stretch on forever. Revas and Salya, two mighty warriors, rode forth with their respective Ekshahenas, each one bearing an array of colorful banners that fluttered in the wind. Varman, the son of Pridika, led his Bojas and Azenkapkuris into battle, their presence like a dark storm cloud about to unleash its fury upon the world. Jadratha, the ruler from the land of Yuzavara, rode forth with an Ekshahena's worth of soldiers, their faces set towards battle like unyielding mountains, as these forces converged upon Hastinapura. The city itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. The air was filled with the clash of steel on steel, the thunder of hoofs on the ground. In the midst of the Kaurava army, a priest from Drupada's kingdom approached. Duryodhana, the chief of the Kuras, the priest, was honored by Dhritarashtra. Duryodhana, Bhishma, and Vidur, who were all seated in a grand assembly, after exchanging warm greetings, the priest began to speak, his words dripping with sincerity. "Me lords," he said, "I have come to share with you news of the welfare of the Pandavas, but also to inquire about your own well-being." He paused for a moment before continuing as leaders. "You are aware of the eternal duties of kings, but I shall recite them once more as a reminder of what is right." And just the priest's eyes swept across the assembly, meeting the gaze of each leader in turn. His voice grew stronger, his words carrying conviction. "Dhritarashtra and Pandu were brothers, sons of the same father. It is only right that their inheritance should be divided equally between them, and yet the sons of Dhritarashtra have taken all for themselves, leaving the sons of Pandu with nothing." The priest's voice took on a hint of sorrow as he recounted the past injustices. "You are aware, my lords, how the sons of Pandu were denied their rightful share of the kingdom. They were forced to flee, and even then they were pursued by the sons of Dhritarashtra, who sought to do them harm. But fate was not yet ready for them, and so they lived." All the priest's words painted a vivid picture in the minds of his listeners. He described how the Pandavas had carved out their own kingdom only to have it stolen from them by deceit. Dhritarashtra had given his sanction to this act, and for 13 years the Pandavas were forced to live in exile. The priest's voice grew more urgent as he spoke of the hardships the Pandavas had endured. They had been subjected to indignities in the council hall, and their wife had suffered alongside them in the wilderness. They had faced unspeakable dangers, and even in the city of Virata, they had been forced to endure suffering beyond measure. The priest's eyes locked onto Duryodhana, his gaze piercing. "My lord," he said, "remembering all these past injustices, is it not time for a peaceful settlement? The sons of Pandu desire only what is rightfully theirs, their share of the kingdom. They do not seek war with the Kuras, but rather a chance to live in peace." A priest's words hung in the air, his conviction palpable. He spoke of the might of the Pandavas' army, which was now gathered at their command. 7 Ekshahenas of troops were ready to fight, and among them were Tejas, like Satyaka, and in the midst of a gathering of the great warriors of the Kuru clan, Bhishma, senior in wisdom and endowed with great effulgence, stood tall, his eyes shining with a deep understanding. He had just listened to the words of the Brahmana, who had recounted the tale of the Pandavas' plight. With a gentle nod, Bhishma began to speak, his voice like a soothing balm on parched souls. "How fortunate that they are all well with Krishna," he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with joy. "How fortunate that they have procured aid and are inclined towards a virtuous course. How fortunate that those sons of Kuru's race desire peace with their cousins." His words dripped with sincerity, like the gentle rainfall on a parched earth. As Bhishma spoke, his eyes scanned the gathering, taking in the faces of the assembled warriors. He paused for a moment as if to let his words sink deep into the hearts of all present. "There is no doubt that what you have said is true," he continued, his voice steady and calm. "Your words, however, are exceedingly sharp. The reason, I suppose, being that you are a Brahmana." Bhishma's gaze turned to Arjuna, the son of Pritha, and his eyes sparkled with admiration. "Arjuna is strong, trained in weapons, and a great Kar warrior," he said, his voice filled with reverence, "who in sooth can withstand him in battle. Even the wielder himself of the thunderbolt cannot. Other bowmen are hardly worth mention." Bhishma's words were laced with conviction, as if he had witnessed Arjula's prowess. First and just, then Karna, son of Rata, interrupted Bhishma's words, his voice dripping with insolence. "There is no creature in the world who does not know these facts," he sneered. "What is the good of repeating them again and again?" He turned to Duryodhana, his eyes flashing with defiance. Bhishma's expression remained calm, but his words were laced with a hint of warning. If they wished to get back their ancestral throne, they should pass the specified period of time in the forest as had been stipulated. He said, his voice firm, but measure afterwards. Let them live as dependents of Duryodhana, safe and sound as. Bhishma finished speaking Dhritarashtra. The Kiraba chief intervened, his words dripping with entreaty. He pacified Bhishma's concerns, rebuked Karna for his insolence, and addressed Sanjaya in a voice filled with deliberation. I shall send Sanjaya to the sons of Pandu, he said, his eyes scanning the gathering once more. So you. The sun was setting over the kingdom of Hastinapura, casting a golden glow over the bustling streets. In the midst of this tranquil scene, Dhritarashtra, the blind king, sat in his chambers, surrounded by the echoes of war and defeat. He turned to Sanjaya, his trusted advisor, and spoke with a mixture of concern and curiosity. They say, O Sanjaya, that the Pandavas have arrived at Upalabhya. He said, his voice low and measured. Go, though, and inquire after them. Greet Ajatasattu in my name and tell him, by good luck it is that you have reached such a city. Sanjaya nodded, taking mental note of the king's words. As he departed for Upalabhya, Dhritarashtra couldn't help but think about the Pandavas whom he had known since their childhood. He remembered how they had always been righteous and good, never faltering in their duty towards him. As Sanjaya approached the city of Upalabhya, he saw the Pandavas gathered around Ajatasattu, their leader. They were a picture of strength and resilience, their eyes shining with a fire that seemed to burn brighter with each passing day. Sanjaya greeted them on behalf of Dhritarashtra, using the words the king had instructed him to speak. The Pandavas listened attentively, their faces expressionless. But as they replied to Sanjaya's words, their voices betrayed a hint of sadness and longing. They spoke of their hardships of being forced into exile and treated treacherously by their foes. Yet even in the face of adversity, their spirits remained unbroken. Dhritarashtra's thoughts turned to his own son Duryodhana, who had always been at odds with the Pandavas. He remembered how Duryodhana had once boasted that he could rob the Pandavas of their rightful share. But now the king realized the folly of such a notion. As Sanjaya returned to Hastinapura, Dhritarashtra's mind wandered to the great warriors who fought alongside the Pandavas. He thought of Arjuna, the wielder of the Gandava, and his brother Bhima, whose strength was matched only by his ferocity in battle. There was also Krishna, the lord of the three worlds, who had proven himself a worthy ally to the Pandavas. The king's thoughts turned darker as he remembered the defeat of Shishupala, the Karusha king who had sought to oppose Krishna in combat. The memory of that fateful day still haunted Dhritarashtra, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as night fell over Hastinapura. Dhritarashtra's anxiety grew. He knew that his son Duryodhana was no match for the combined might of in the kingdom of Hastinapura. King Dhritarashtra's trusted advisor Sanjaya had been sent on a mission to Upalabhya, where he would meet with the Pandavas. As he arrived at their court, Sanjaya was filled with joy and respect for the five brothers, Yudhishthira, Dharmasena, Arjuna, Nakula, and Sahadeva. Approached King Yudhishthira, who sat on his throne surrounded by his loyal companions. The old advisor made a deep bow to the king, expressing his gratitude for being received warmly after such a long journey. Sanjaya's words were laced with affection and respect as he inquired about the well-being of the Pandavas, especially their wives and children. Yudhishthira, pleased by Sanjaya's presence, welcomed him warmly and asked about his safe passage to Upalabhya. The king then began to ask questions about the state of affairs at Hastinapura, inquiring after the health and well-being of his grandfather Bhishma, his uncle Dhritarashtra, and other prominent members of the Kurukshetra royal family. Sanjaya's response was a lengthy one, filled with details about the kingdom. He spoke of King Dhritarashtra's concern for the Pandavas' welfare and his own eagerness to know about their lives. Sanjaya also mentioned the great bowmen who served under the king, including Drona, Kripa, and Burisravas, all of whom were renowned for their bravery and wisdom. Yudhishthira listened intently. He expressed his gratitude for Sanjaya's news and asked about the treatment of the Brahmanas in Hastinapura. He reminded Sanjaya that the king's duty was to protect them, as they were the guardians of dharma or righteousness. Without their blessings, the kingdom would be doomed to suffer. Sanjaya nodded in agreement, acknowledging the importance of maintaining good relations with the Brahmanas. The old advisor then spoke about the exploits of Arjuna, who had single-handedly defeated countless enemies and become a hero of the Kurukshetra people. He also mentioned Bhima's bravery, Sahadeva's military prowess, and Nakula's victories in battle. However, as Sanjaya continued to speak, his tone turned somber. He reminded Yudhishthira that their troubles were far from over, for they had yet to face the challenges of their own family members, who seemed more interested in causing harm than in working towards a common goal. The king's words hung in the air like a challenge, as if urging his brothers and cousins to come together and support one another in times of need. In this way, Sanjaya's visit to Upaplavia. As Sanjaya stood before Yudhishthira, he gazed at him with a mixture of empathy and respect. "It is as you have said, O son of Pandu," he began, his voice low and soothing. "You ask about the welfare of the Kuras and their most esteemed members. I bring tidings that they are in good health, free from illness, and filled with excellent spirit." Yudhishthira's eyes narrowed slightly as Sanjaya continued, "But there are those who walk a path of righteousness, alongside Dhritarashtra's son and others who had strayed into wickedness. Despite this, the prince is known to make gifts, even to his enemies, and it is unlikely that he will withdraw the offerings made to the Brahmana." Sanjaya paused, as if collecting his thoughts before proceeding. "It is a custom among Kshatriyas to follow a path of honor, but one that sometimes leads them to harm those who bear no ill will towards them. This is not a good practice." Sanjaya implied, his voice tinged with disapproval. For Dhritarashtra's son Duryodhana was indeed guilty of the sin of intestine dissension, bearing ill will towards Yudhishthira and his brothers, despite their righteousness. But Dhritarashtra himself did not approve of this injury. He grieved at heart for it, having learned from the Brahmanas that provoking such divisions was the greatest of all sins. As Sanjaya spoke, he seemed to transport Yudhishthira back to the memories of his past glories. "They remember your prowess on the field and that of Arjuna, who leads in battle," he said. "Bhema's mighty mass is recalled when the conch and drum resound at their highest pitch. The two sons of Madrinakula and Sahadeva are remembered for their skill with shafts on the battlefield, their movements swift and unerring." Sanjaya's words were laced with a deep understanding of the complexities of fate. "I believe that what the future holds for each person cannot be known," he said softly. "You, O son of Pandu, who are endowed with all virtues, have had to endure troubles of unbearable kind, but I have faith in your intelligence. You will make up for this suffering through your wisdom." As Sanjaya finished speaking, Yudhishthira's eyes seemed to cloud over, weighed down by the memories and the struggles that lay ahead. But Sanjaya's words also held a message of hope that with intelligence and virtue they could all find peace. The sons of Pandu, the sons of Dhritarashtra, the Srinjayas, and all the kings gathered there. Sanjaya concluded his speech, his voice carrying a sense of gravity. "This is what your father, the sun, was setting over the camp of the Pandavas as Yudhishthira, the eldest son of Pandu, stood tall, his eyes scanning the gathering before him. The air was thick with anticipation for Sanjaya. The charioteer and messenger of Dhritarashtra had finally arrived from Hastinapura. Sanjaya dismounted his chariot, his eyes locking onto Yudhishthira's as he bowed low in respect. "I greet you, great king," he said, his voice filled with deference. "And Vrakadara, the mighty Dhamma and Ananjaya, the archer Arjuna, and the two sons of Madrinakula, and Sahadeva and Vasudeva, the descendant of Shura, and Satyakai, and the aged ruler of the Panchalas, Drupada." Sanjaya's eyes moved around the circle, taking in the faces of the Pandavas' loyal friends and all these. "Let all listen to the words I bring from a desire for the welfare of the Kuras," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "King Dhritarashtra, eager to seize this chance at peace, hastened my preparation for this journey." Here as Sanjaya spoke, Yudhishthira's expression turned thoughtful. He knew that the words his father had sent through Sanjaya were laced with a deep desire for reconciliation. The king of Hastinapura was willing to do whatever it took to bring an end to the war between the Pandavas and the Kuras. Sanjaya continued, his words pouring out like a river. "The sons of Pritha are endowed with every virtue, steadiness, mildness, candor, born in a high family. They are human, liberal, and loath to do any act that would bring shame upon themselves or their kin." He paused, his eyes locking onto Yudhishthira's. "Once more, a thought of committing a sinful act, one that would result in universal slaughter, is abhorrent to you." Sanjaya said, his voice filled with conviction. "Who could knowingly be guilty of an act that would lead to the destruction of so many lives, an act consisting of the destruction of men, which would be sinful and lead to hell, no matter whether it resulted in victory or defeat?" As Sanjaya spoke, Yudhishthira felt a pang of sorrow. He knew that his father's words were not just empty words, but a genuine attempt at peace. The thought of war, of bloodshed and destruction was indeed abhorrent to him. Sanjaya continued his words, pouring out like a prayer. Blessed are those who have served their relatives, cause they are the true sons and friends and relatives of Kura's race who would. The sun was setting over the kingdom, casting a warm orange glow over the palace grounds. Yudhishthira, the eldest son of Pandu, sat in contemplative silence, his eyes fixed on Sanjaya, the charioteer and narrator. Sanjaya, he said, finally, his voice low and measured, what words have I spoken that make you think war is inevitable? Sanjaya, seated at Yudhishthira's feet, looked up with a hint of surprise. Your words, O prince, speak of peace as the preferable choice to war. Who would wish to fight